Hello, I am David Pyles of Grace Primitive Baptist Church, and this speech is being prepared for the Tyler Salt and Light Conference. We welcome you. My speech this evening is going to be about socialism, which has become a real hot topic in the United States in the past few years. We have presidential elections coming up, and we have had candidates who are not only socialists but are proud to proclaim themselves as socialists. Even more disturbing is that there have been a great number of people who have followed these candidates, and it seems as though a very large percentage of these people have come from our nation's youth. This is very disturbing to me. I do not think that these young people really understand what socialism is, and they don't understand what they can expect to come of socialism. Now, you may reasonably ask, why is it that a preacher should know anything about this? Well, it happens that in my youth, I had a great interest in economics and finance. All of my collegiate education was in these areas. I went so far as to get a PhD in these areas in 1986, and then I taught mathematical economics for about 4 years at Oklahoma State University. In 1990, I felt like I needed to commit more time to preaching, and that is when I left academics. But I have still stayed involved. Over most of that period, I have managed or advised a sizable investment fund that invests in commodities and financial assets all over the world. And so I've had to stay abreast with economics, not only in the United States, but in Japan and Germany and Norway, Sweden. I'm not going to tell you that I'm the most informed person that you could meet, but I have had to stay far more informed than most. One thing that may surprise you is that during my collegiate education, in the 3 degrees I got and in the 2 universities that I attended, I did not have a single socialist for a professor. All of the professors that I had taught that socialism is a poorly reasoned system, that it is a system that is disconnected from reality. They not only presented this as a philosophy or an opinion, but they gave sound analysis for their claims. And then also, they spent time talking about historical examples where socialism had been tried. And they showed that socialism always fails. It may take a few years, it may take many years, but the conclusion is always the same. Another thing that was discussed much then was how that the United States was the economic wonder of world history. During World War II, we had about every major political / economic view on the field of battle. We had the Republican capitalist of the West. We had the communist of Russia. We had the socialist Democrats of Germany, and we had the monarchist of Japan. And one thing that all historians agree on is that the world was then saved from the worst forms of tyranny by the economic might of the United States. There were other countries that fought valiantly. They may have invested more blood than we did, but those countries were largely supplied by the industrial machine of America. And some have estimated that 2/3 of the equipment that was used in that war by the Allies came from American factories. And by equipment, we're including machine guns, bullets, tanks, whatever. The Germans, the Japanese, the Russians, all these people could not produce what America produced in that war. And then after the war was over, America implemented the Marshall Plan, whereby it used its economic might to help rebuild Europe. America has less than 5% of the population of the world. It owns almost 1/3 of its wealth. The publicly traded companies in America are worth more than all such companies in the rest of the world combined. The United States of America has been the leader in invention, innovation, for over a century. It has truly been a marvel. I do not know that it will continue, but the past record is indeed impressive. I don't think there's been anything like it in world history, and you need to understand this. Those feats were accomplished under a system primarily characterized by free market capitalism. What is socialism? I'm afraid some people think it means to be sociable. That is not what it means. A textbook definition of socialism says that socialism is a political economic system wherein the means of production, and this means the assets of the economy, are owned by the community in general, and they are managed or regulated by the state for the benefit of all, or at least in theory. What is capitalism? Capitalism is a political economic system where the assets of an economy are owned privately, and their owners are granted the freedom to manage those assets for their personal interests. Now, you may ask, what will be the outcomes of applying these new systems? And let me tell you that what theory predicts and what we have seen in practice have been exactly the same. Under capitalism, this is what you can expect: that the rich will get richer, the poor will get richer, but not always at the same pace. Sometimes the rich get richer at a faster pace, and so one of the things that we can see in capitalism is inequality. There will be times when the inequality becomes worse. I do not think that capitalism necessarily produces the degree of inequality that we see in America today. I think that is largely the result of poor policy. Nonetheless, I acknowledge that capitalism can result in inequality. Now, under socialism, in theory, we have more equality. But the problem is that people are equalized at a lower level. The rich man is not as well off as he was before, but neither is the poor man. This may not be the immediate effects of socialism, but this is where socialism is headed. We may not be as different, but we're all going to be at a lower level. And this tells you that socialism is not a remedy for poverty. The only thing that socialism remedies is envy. If you're a poor man, socialism may give you less to envy because the rich man is not so far ahead of you. But the price you paid for that is that you are going to be poorer yourself. Now, if a person is foolish enough to pay that price, I say that they're well deserving of their poverty. That is not a wise thing to do. Under capitalism, sometimes some people are better off than others, but prosperity under capitalism tends to communicate from one person to the other, and in fact, a capitalist firmly believes that he is not going to be worse off on account of another man being better off. Now let's take someone like Steve Jobs, who was co-founder of Apple. That man made millions and millions and indeed billions of dollars for inventing the personal computer. He made a lot more money than the rest of us. But still, we are better off on account of what he did. We have the convenience of our computers, we have the convenience of our phones and devices, and then think about the millions upon millions of jobs that were created when that man, or started to be created when that man invented the personal computer. Yes, he benefited more than we did, but all of us benefited. Now, under socialism, we are going to take from the wealthy, and we're going to give to the lower income people in an effort to achieve greater equality. Remember this, that capitalism complains of poverty, socialism complains of inequality. Those are not the same thing. And also, let me say this about the problems that we have in America, the poverty problem and other problems. The young people in this country are saying those problems are owing to capitalism. They think that socialism is going to solve those problems, and hence they have shown their support for people like Bernie Sanders. This argument is predicated upon the assumption that America is purely capitalistic. America is far from being purely capitalistic. In fact, America is significantly socialistic right now. You may say to me, but earlier you said that under a socialistic system, the community owns the assets, whereas under a capitalistic system, the assets are privately owned. And is it not the case that economic assets in the United States are privately owned? Yes. And I've heard some people say that proves we're not socialistic. But that is a pedantic argument. In America, the dispute is not so much over who owns the assets as it is who is entitled to the income that the asset produces. Now, if the government is taking half the income that the asset produces by way of taxes, that's not a whole lot different than if the government owned half the asset. So looking at it that way, America is quite socialistic. In fact, 40% of the gross domestic product of America, almost 40%, is consumed by government. That figure would have been unbelievable several decades ago. Transfer payments in America, this means tax one man, give it to another man, are now well in excess of $2 trillion, a figure that would have been incomprehensible in bygone years in America. Regulation is intense in America. Taxes are high enough. In fact, they are too high in America. These are all the marks of socialism. And if you're complaining of problems that we have here in America, have you considered the possibility that those problems are deriving from socialism, not from capitalism? And in fact, that's the contention that I'm going to make. The problems we have are deriving from socialism. And why would we want more socialism or use socialism as the medicine to remedy this problem when we have been using socialism in ever-increasing doses for decades now, and according to the socialists themselves, we're not any better off. Poverty, they say, is as bad as ever. Inequality, they say, is even worse. So why use more of the same old medicine? The problem you're going to have with socialism is that the economy cannot grow at the same pace as capitalism does. When you take from the rich man and you give to the low-income man, not only do you have a problem with the ethics of this, but you are also taking from an entrepreneur and you're giving to one who is a consumer. You're taking from one who is an investor, and you're taking from an individual who probably achieved his wealth because he knows how to take $1 million and turn it into $2 million fast. Whereas a government is very good at taking $1 million and turning it into nothing fast. What I'm saying to you is that when you take from this entrepreneur, you are taking away fuel for a powerful economic growth machine. So let's suppose, for example, that the government had taxed away everything that Steve Jobs made. Where will we be now? He invented the computer in pursuit of profit. You're taking money away from a powerful growth machine. Now, if you give that money to the lower income man, yes, he's better off today. But because you have stymied the growth of the economy, you're going to see less demand for labor, you're going to see less escalation in wages, and somewhere down the road, that low-income man is going to be worse off than where he would have been under capitalism, and of course, the wealthy man will be worse off too. Everybody is going to be worse off. That doesn't make sense. And now to give you some real-life examples. In the last few years, I've heard many socialists praise Norway, Sweden, Finland, Netherlands, Denmark as being near ideal examples of their system. And indeed, I would say that there are smart people in those countries. If anybody could make socialism work, it would be those smart people. But what have we observed in those countries? In the last 10 years, we have seen anemic growth in those countries. None of those countries surpassed the United States. The average growth in those countries was almost doubled by the United States. Again, I'm talking about the last 10 years. This was notwithstanding the fact that the United States had anemic years itself. The United States was much less than average over those last 10 years. All right, now let's look at the European Union. Some people think the European Union is a very good arrangement. A few days ago, I checked, and I saw where many of the stock indices, let me correct some of the stock indices for the European Union have not gone up in 22 years. Their stock market is right where it was 22 years ago. Take the Netherlands with some of the highest taxes in the world. Stock market has not gone up in 22 years. No one 22 years ago would have predicted that kind of pathetic performance. In the United States, our stock market, measured by the S&P 500, has gone up 2.7 times. And then if you want to look at NASDAQ, where the high-tech stuff is traded, it's gone up 7.7 times, while Europe has done nothing. And maybe that explains why socialists generally portray the stock market as being evil, because they have to. It does not do a very good job of supporting their case. Be sure of this: nearly all Americans are benefited when that stock market is going up. Now, even if you believe, as some have claimed, that Sweden, Norway, etc., have a higher standard of living than the United States, they cannot maintain that status under their anemic growth rates. And this is what destroys socialism. That somewhere down the road, it's going to fall behind, you see. It's going to fall behind, and when those people in the socialistic countries see that they're falling behind, then they're going to rebel against the system, and public support for the system will be lost. And the only thing that will be able to sustain it at that point will be oppression by governments. All right, now, socialism commonly charges capitalism with improper motives. The socialists will say that capitalists are greedy, self-serving kind of people. That is a shallow-minded charge. Under capitalism, the way you get ahead is by providing other people with a better product or a better service. That's why Steve Jobs got rich. He had such a good product that served other people well. On the other hand, I'm going to say that the motives of socialism are not always good. You know, the socialists, because it's a system driven by envy, almost always are stoking people's envy. They are stoking class warfare. They're telling under-income people that the reason you're down is because the rich man is oppressing you. And sad to say, poor people have been buying into that argument for years and years and being deceived by it. Rich people are not hard to understand. Rich people want to be richer. And rich people know, if they're capitalists, that one of the easiest ways for that to happen would be for other people to have more money. A rich man knows that poverty is bad for business. He knows that what is bad for business is bad for him. He doesn't want to see other people being poor. And by the way, let me say that capitalists can want many of the same objectives that socialists want. We want to get rid of poverty. We would like to see qualified health care for all. We would like to see public funding for education and things like this. The disagreement is not over the ends. The disagreement is over the means by which we get there. Rich people want to be richer. And in order to get richer, they have to expand their economic empire. And to expand their economic empire, they have to have more labor. And in order to get more labor, they have to pay better wages. But on the other hand, I sometimes question the motives of socialists. Socialist politicians especially. He's the one who has an incentive that to see that the poor people did not make too much progress, because the problem is that a man who pays taxes to the government and a man who receives aid from the government, those two men have very different view of the world. And if we help that poor man too much and we get him to progressing too fast, he might start thinking the way that rich man thinks, and he may start voting the way that rich man votes. Now, we sure can't have that happen. That could be a political disaster. And I'm going to tell you that my frank opinion is that one reason we have poverty in this country is because poor people keep voting themselves into poverty. I mean, it's time to wake up. I want you to consider the upcoming election. And I will not comment on things wherein I am supposedly unqualified to comment. I'll just stick with economics. Let's just talk economics. Donald Trump has done almost exactly what low-income people in this country needed to be done. He realizes that wages need to go up. As of a few years ago, real wages in this country were no better than they were when I was in high school. That's pathetic. The way we're going to help low-income people, and the only way we're going to do it on any sustained, enduring basis, we've got to get a tight labor market and get their wages up. And if you think, being a poor person, that the government is going to give you a big enough check to catch you up, then dream on. It's not going to happen. I've been listening to promises like that for 50 years. They're liars. It's not going to happen. The thing that is going to get low-income people up economically is a tight labor market with escalating wages. So what did Donald Trump do? He shut down the illegal immigration to cut off the supply of cheap labor. He gave tax cuts to businesses to increase the demand for labor. And then when the expected acceleration started to occur and the labor market started to get tight, he began to admonish the Federal Reserve, do not be jacking up interest rates and spoiling the party, which I think they have done in times past, right when the low-income man was about to start to benefit from a heated economy. I'm afraid that our policymakers sometimes have put water on the fire. Donald Trump did exactly what sound economics would prescribe, yet my prediction is in a few months, when we hold the election, many poor people will be stampeding to the polls trying to vote him out. Now, I've talked to you for a while about socialism, capitalism from an economic perspective, and I'm going to summarize by saying this. Socialism with its high taxes, socialism with its transfer payments, socialism with its extreme regulation cannot grow as fast as capitalism. If socialism is ahead today, it will be behind tomorrow. The capitalistic system rewards growth, rewards it tremendously. It rewards innovation. Think about Tesla, the new electric car maker. That company right now is worth more money on the stock market than General Motors and Ford combined. It's not making nearly the money, but because there is potential for growth there, the free market capitalistic economy rewards that. With that tremendous incentive for growth, you can be sure that our system, or the free market capitalistic system, is going to grow more than another system where there's far less incentive because the profits are all going to be taxed away. Socialism cannot stay up with capitalism on growth, which means if you're a happy socialist today, you're going to be unhappy tomorrow. One of these days, you're going to look around and see that there are other people who are ahead of you. And when that happens, the same envy that gave birth to socialism will kill it. Now, I want to talk about what the Bible has to say on these subjects. I've heard people say that the Bible teaches socialism. It does no such a thing. The Bible teaches giving. But it is not giving to vote in a government that will coerce other people to give. Much less is it giving to vote in a government that will coerce other people to give to us. That's extortion. That's not giving. And when we go into the Bible, you're going to find some statements that surely do not seem to be in the spirit of socialism. For example, consider what the Apostle Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 9, where he warned Timothy against supporting widows in the congregation who were capable of supporting themselves or of being supported by their families. He told Timothy, your support will not be appreciated and it will be very corrupting to the morals of those who are receiving it. Limit the support to people who cannot provide for themselves. In that same context, he made this very sobering statement. But if any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now in the Bible, an infidel is in pretty bad shape. But here he says this person is even worse than an infidel, which ought to make anyone very wary of trying to advance himself off of community coffers. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would work not, neither should he eat. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 10. And in verse 6, he commanded that the church withdraw from lazy people who would not support themselves. The Bible is tough on this subject. And that doesn't sound like socialism to me. But, of course, there'll be people who will say, don't you know that the Apostle Paul was a hard man, unreasonable man? Very well. Let's consider what Jesus Christ said. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus gave us a parable that we know as the parable of the talents. This will start at verse 15. In this parable of the talents, the Lord or owner, he distributes to his various servants talents, that means money, and commands them to invest it, and he distributes to every man according to his several ability. He didn't give them all the same. He gave to every man according to his several ability. I don't think socialism would have done that. It would have given all men the same, and that would have led to the collapse of the system. When you give the poor farmer just as much land to farm as the good farmer, pretty soon we're going to be going hungry. When you give the slow mechanic as many cars to fix as the fast mechanic, then pretty soon we're going to be walking. Economists can disagree on many things, but this is one thing upon which they all agree: that the general welfare is best served when every man is doing what he is best gifted to do. In this parable, every man was given something to do, but it was in accordance to his several ability. That does not sound like socialism. But the more striking example is going to be in Luke chapter 19, starting at verse 12. Here we have the parable of the pounds. And in this parable, the Lord distributes to his servants each a pound. Now you'll say, that's socialism. Well, let's continue to read. Each one is given a pound and commanded to invest it. The Lord leaves for a while. He comes back and makes an assessment. One servant had increased his pound to 10 pounds. Another had increased his to 5. There was one who had done nothing, and he had nothing but the original pound. All right, now at this point, the parable becomes an utter refutation of socialism. In that, number one, each man was rewarded in accordance to his performance. Not the same. Each was awarded in proportion to his performance. Number two, and this is the shocker, the Lord said to the slothful servant, or actually said to others, take the pound from the slothful servant and give it to him that hath 10. Now, that's not socialism, is it? In fact, that statement would have a socialist pulling the hair out by the roots. And in fact, even some parties in the parable objected. They said, Lord, he hath 10 pounds, as though this is unfair that you would take from the guy who's got one and give it to the guy who has the most. But the Lord was unyielding. He doubled down. He said, verily I say unto you, unto him that hath shall be given, and from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. That statement may seem like a hard statement coming out of the mouth of Jesus, but whether you like it or not, it's how the world operates. And rather than trying to fight against it or object to it, it would do a whole lot better to understand it. We have a saying in this world, the rich get richer and the poor get poor. Even knowledge works in accordance to this principle. A man that knows a lot can learn at a faster pace than a man that does not know much. That's what we call the learning curve. It makes it difficult for backward countries to catch up to highly technological countries. They can move forward, but they have a hard time catching up to highly technological countries because of the learning curve. Whether it's knowledge, whether it's money, the rich get richer, and a lot of times the poor get poorer. And let me say that in the United States of America, a strange thing has happened, that we have been increasing transfer payments, taking from the top, taking from the wealthy, giving to those with lower incomes in ever increasing amounts, and yet the complaint is that the folks at the top are holding more and more of the nation's wealth. Now, it looks like that the government is trying to shovel it from the top to the bottom ever more furiously, but God's just shoveling it right back to the top. And that is not because God dislikes poor people. The Bible says he favors poor people. It's because God does not like the system, and he rejects it as an ethical and efficient system for helping poor people. This is not the way you go about doing it. We need to correct the poverty problem in this country, but you do not fix it this way. Now, here's another thing you need to know that is all over the Bible. God makes a distinction between a person who is poor and a person who is a loser. That makes all the difference in the world to God. There were people in the Bible who were very poor, but they were not losers. When Joseph was seated in the Egyptian jail cell, he was poor, he was oppressed, but he wasn't a loser. Joseph was a winner from the top of the head to the bottom of the toe. And I'm going to give you some adjectives that define a winner. A winner is principled, positive, patient, joyous, grateful, responsible, diligent, determined, dedicated, and dependable. That describes a lot of people in the Bible, and most of them are poor. Here's a loser. This is what God considers to be a loser. Unprincipled, negative, impatient, complaining, bitter, unthankful, blame deflecting, slothful, surrendering, uncommitted, undependable. America today is full of them. Losers. When Jesus said, from him that hath, or to him that hath shall be given, and from him that hath not shall be taken even that he hath, he wasn't saying God's going to take from the poor and give to the rich. He was saying God's going to take from the losers and he's going to give to the winners. God likes winners. God does not like losers. God does not believe in taking from winners and giving to losers. God believes in taking losers and turning them into winners. Socialism takes from the winners and it gives to the losers. I think it's a system that God does not like, and that's why it doesn't work. And that's why it never has worked. You implement socialism, you may help that poor man for the time being, but down the road, he's going to be better, he's going to be worse off, and so is everybody else too. All right, now let me have some concluding remarks. What do? Even the staunchest capitalists would be critical of a government that left people to starve in the streets. Even the staunchest capitalist would be critical of a government that left its young people uneducated. And my point in this is that all of us are socialists to a degree. The question is, to what degree? And we have to ask this question because too much of it is going to lead to the long-term exacerbation of the very problems you're trying to fix. Too much of it will kill us. So to what degree? And I realize that's not an easy question to answer, but I can tell you this, that the best single simple measure of what degree of socialism we have would be the taxes that we're paying. Socialism cannot live without taxes. And I'm going to say to many young people that think they're socialists, down the road, when you're working over half a year just to pay off your tax debt, I think your perspective is going to change. How much taxes are we paying? Well, in the United States of America, some people are paying as high as 37% federal taxes, 13.3% state taxes, around 15% Social Security taxes. We hadn't even paid our sales taxes and our property taxes, and we hadn't even paid the taxes that are implicit into things we buy. There's a service station right there. I think that's $1.79 on the gasoline price. About 40 cents of that is taxes. And when you add up all these numbers, it is a huge percentage of income. I think it is unconscionable, and the people who founded this country would absolutely agree with me. And over in Europe, where there's been this pathetic growth that I talked about earlier, it's much worse. It is very common in Europe for governments to take more than half of what people make. Consider this, that in the Bible, when Israel was contemplating a king, God began to warn them about what the consequences of a king would be. 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 15, God told Israel, you'll be having to pay him 10% tax. 10%? Evidently, God thinks 10% is high. And the men who founded this country would adamantly agree. Now, I acknowledge that all of us expect more from government than was expected in those ancient times. True enough, I acknowledge that. But let's consider Genesis chapter 41, verse 34. This was where Joseph was counseling Pharaoh on how to deal with a very exigent and expensive circumstance, and Joseph advised him to implement a 20% tax. 10%, 20%, low-income people in this country would rejoice to have tax rates like that. And one thing that really annoys me out of liberals and conservatives, liberals will complain that the rich are not paying enough, and I've heard conservatives complain that the poor are not paying enough. I've helped both kinds of people do their taxes. Let me tell you, they're all paying too much. I believe taxes in our country are too high, and I believe it's serving as a drag on our economy. And this and other socialistic measures that we have implemented over the years has created slower growth than we should have had. It has not created sufficient demand for labor, and this is one reason why low-income people are having such a hard time getting ahead. The convenience store right down the street here that I'm looking at, the girl that's in there at the cash register, she's not making nearly the amount of money in real terms that she would have been making when I was a teenager. What's wrong? It's not capitalism. It's because we got too much socialism. That's my belief. Socialism is not the solution. Socialism is the problem. And let me say to all young people that if you want things like health care for all, or you want things like education for everyone, the things that Bernie Sanders is advocating, which are fine with me if they're feasible. But if you want those, it takes profits to pay for those. Be sure that all taxes in this country come out of profits. Even when property is taxed, that property would not exist had it not been for profits that were made in the past. I commonly hear socialists speak of profits as though they're evil, and they talk about big corporations with their big profits, and they say that's evil. Let me tell you, those of you who are drawing welfare checks, those corporations are the ones that are writing those checks, not the government. I'd like to talk to you a long time about that. It is the profits of America that are going to send people to school. It's the profits in America that are going to provide health care for all. If you young people want these things, you got to have the profit in order to pay for them. And if you want the profit to pay for them, you better start preaching free market capitalism, because socialism ain't going to get you there. If anyone tells you that they have an example of successful socialism, I will tell you this, that either A, the socialism is being exaggerated, or B, the success is being exaggerated, or C, you haven't given it enough time. Sound economic reasoning teaches us to go with free market capitalism. History teaches us to go with free market capitalism. And I believe, most importantly, it's what the Bible teaches us. Thank you very much. God bless.